Not even a rat could get through. In the history of the Vietnam War, there are statements that do more than reflect a moment in time. They encapsulate an entire strategic worldview. The remark attributed to U.S. Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara regarding the electronic barrier system, "Not even a rat could get through," is one such statement. At first glance, it appears to be a confident, even boastful declaration. Yet, when placed within the historical context of the 1960s, it reveals the deep-seated faith of American policymakers in technology, science, and quantitative analysis as tools to control and ultimately win war. This analysis does not aim to retell the Vietnam War as a sequence of events. Rather, it seeks to examine the historical logic behind McNamara's statement, to explain why the so-called impenetrable barrier failed, and to explore what that failure signifies in the broader history of military thought. Robert McNamara and the transformation of U.S. military thinking. 1. McNamara as a product of Cold War America. Robert McNamara was not a traditional battlefield general. He emerged from the world of academia and corporate management, serving as president of the Ford Motor Company before entering government. He embodied post-World War II American confidence in industrial efficiency, scientific management, and rational planning. McNamara believed that complex problems could be quantified, systems could be optimized, air and war itself could be managed scientifically. Upon entering the Pentagon, he brought with him a core assumption: white right-pointing backhand index with sufficient data and analysis, war could be reduced to a managerial problem. 2. Systems analysis and the concept of war as a machine. McNamara aggressively applied systems analysis to military strategy. In this framework, the enemy was viewed as a system. Logistics were the lifeblood of that system. Disrupt the flow, and the system would collapse. From this perspective, the Vietnam War was interpreted less as a political or nationalist struggle and more as a logistical problem, a supply chain issue, a technical challenge of interdiction. This mindset directly gave rise to the concept of the McNamara Line. 3. The McNamara Line. Theory and practice. 1. Strategic objectives of the barrier. The primary purpose of the McNamara Line was to block infiltration from North Vietnam into the south, or isolate the southern battlefield, weaken revolutionary forces by cutting off supplies and manpower. According to U.S. strategic logic, once the supply routes were severed, our insurgent forces would be unable to sustain combat operations. The war would gradually collapse under its own weight. 2. The technological architecture of the system. The barrier was not merely a physical fence, but a complex technological network. Seismic sensors to detect ground movement, acoustic sensors to identify sound patterns, reconnaissance aircraft collecting real-time data, analysis centers processing sensor inputs, artillery and air power responding immediately. In theory, this constituted a closed, self-reinforcing system. It was within this conceptual framework that McNamara declared the barrier so effective that not even a rat could get through. 4. The fundamental error: viewing Vietnam through an industrial lens. 1. The enemy was not an industrial system. McNamara's core mistake lay in treating the adversary as a modern, industrialized system. In reality, Vietnamese revolutionary forces were a people's war movement, a human-centered rather than machine-dependent, a flexible, decentralized, and adaptive. Their supply routes were not rigid pipelines, but living networks capable of constant change. 2. Technology versus experience and will. In response to sensors and surveillance, revolutionary forces generated false signals, used animals or decoys, shifted routes and timing continuously. Rather than confronting technology directly, they rendered it irrelevant. This illustrates a fundamental historical principle. Technology is only decisive when the enemy accepts the rules imposed by that technology. Not even a rat could get through as a historical statement. 1. A politically motivated declaration. McNamara's statement was not directed solely at military professionals. It also served to reassure the U.S. Congress, calm public opinion, demonstrate that the war was under control. It reflected a political necessity to project confidence and mastery over events. 2. From symbol of confidence to symbol of failure. As the war dragged on, the statement acquired an ironic meaning. It symbolized the gap between planning maps and battlefield reality. It exposed the limits of technocratic warfare. It revealed the failure of quantitative metrics to capture political and human dynamics. 6. McNamara's late realization. By the late 1960s, McNamara himself began to question the foundations of his approach. As statistical reports failed to reflect reality. Body counts did not equal strategic success. A national will could not be measured numerically. His departure from the Pentagon marked the collapse of the belief that technological superiority alone could win the war in Vietnam. 7. Historical significance and enduring lessons. Today, the phrase "not even a rat could get through" is widely regarded as a lesson in the limitations of technology, a case study in the power of people's war, a warning against military doctrines that underestimate human and political factors. Vietnam stands in global military history as a clear example of how a materially weaker force can defeat a superior power by mastering the nature of the conflict and sustaining political will. 8. Conclusion. History is not written by censors. The McNamara Line did not fail because it lacked technology. It failed because it misunderstood the nature of war. McNamara's statement, once an expression of supreme confidence, has become a historical symbol, a cautionary tale, and a global lesson. White right-pointing backhand index war is not fought solely on maps, but in the minds and will of people. White right-pointing backhand index no barrier can contain the determination of a nation.